You're listening to the Deloitte Business Chemistry Confessions podcast series. Hello, I'm your host, Kim Christford, National Managing Director of the Deloitte Greenhouses.
And I'm Suzanne Vickberg, also known as Dr. Suze, lead researcher for business chemistry.
Welcome to this week's episode of Deloitte Business Chemistry Confessions. You're about to go on a journey of true workplace stories of success and failure that all came down to one thing: business chemistry. The squeaky wheel gets the oil, right? Or does it? Some work cultures tend to reward people who talk the most. But have you ever worked with an introvert? Quiet, analytical, organized, extremely smart, but often overlooked and misunderstood. Today's episode explores one person's experience in a new position where her client's culture was at odds with her own, more introverted work style. Just when she started questioning her new position, her like-minded manager guided her through the storm to a much-needed success. But don't take it from me. Listen to Rachel as she recounts the story of secret weapons.
There was a lot of daily interactions with, senior leadership. The work itself was, very broad scope. So it was very fast-paced, lots of big personalities. I found myself essentially starting two different jobs in a sense, because I was learning, the culture of my consultancy as well as my clients. I needed to have some quiet time, some focused time that was in a low stimulus environment. And at first, entering the policy office, I felt like that was going to be a huge challenge, just given the nature of the work and the personalities.
Rachel's in a really tough situation here because this is a brand new job for her. And it's interesting. She actually says she has to learn two new cultures. And
Right.
She describes a bit some of her own personality preferences and things. But it is interesting because we often see that personality isn't just an individual thing. It can be a cultural thing.
Right. I think it's a little bit like when you're interacting with a new person. You're trying to understand them. You're trying to understand what makes them tick. But in this case, she's trying to understand the culture as a whole.
But luckily, I was paired, or my boss at the time was also an introvert. And so at the very beginning of the project, we had some very honest and open conversations about what that looked like in the office itself that we were supporting, and how we could still be very high performers and not feel like we had to move so far away from our true selves. So I think it was great having her to sort of bring me back down to reality and let me know that even though it was challenging, there were definitely strategies that we could employ to be really successful, stay true to ourselves, have a really effective working relationship internally, and then have our clients love us at the same time.
Rachel has an expression here which I really love. It's, we didn't have to move too far away from our true selves. This idea of a true self, what comes natural to you, is really the fundamental underpinning of business chemistry. Everybody has these styles, and yet we talk so much around how to relate to others. We certainly wouldn't want to imply that you can't be yourself.
Right. Yeah, I think that often when we talk with clients about business chemistry, people wonder about that. If you're saying one of the primary tenets of business chemistry is that you should flex to other people, does that mean that now you're not being true to yourself? Are you still the same person if you act in a different way? And I really appreciated that she seemed to get that, and her boss seemed to get it. Yes, we're in an environment that requires us to flex, but we don't have to change completely. We can flex in particular ways that let us maintain the things that are our strengths and that are going to make us successful.
Yeah, it helps a lot that her boss has clearly been there, had this experience herself, and could propose some helpful strategies for how to flex without losing that true self.
There were some very prominent guests coming to visit my client's office, and we were charged with essentially leading the planning efforts for that. So the intention was to have these guests meet with the agency director and also with different programs across the agency. So we, thought through some of the logistics and also did some of the strategic planning around what those conversations were going to look like. And so, a very big deal internally. There was a lot of, pressure on making sure that the day was perfect, not wanting to, harm the reputation of the agency or the office in any way. So immediately, we thought we need some sort of process laid out, right? So the first thing we did was to create a visitor standard operating procedure. So we had laid out what the planning before a visit should look like, what should happen the day of, and then thinking about how to wrap up some of the follow-up work that occurs after a visit. Things like an annotated agenda that outlines, essentially every minute of the visit and where, everyone should be, specific talking points, objectives of various meetings, to kind of help everyone involved understand where they should be and when they should be there.
Rachel is really getting into the nuts and bolts here. She's got these very important visitors coming in. There's clearly a lot of pressure. And what I find fascinating is the words that she used are so typical of that Guardian pattern. It's all about logistics and process. And she says everything has to be just perfect. Well, who better to make sure that everything is perfect than a Guardian who's going to pay attention to those details?
Yeah, I think this is the first place where we really get a clue into not just that she's an introvert, but specifically that she's probably a Guardian. Because I, too, was struck with the words. I mean, she says annotated agenda. It outlines every minute. It has specific objectives. And no one's really going to be likely to do that except a Guardian. And what I love about it is, when she talked about the work of the policy office as a whole, she described it very differently. Very high level, very fast paced, strategic. And this work is very different than the work of the office as a whole. And that points to the need for diversity on any team. So if they had only people who worked at that 50,000-foot view all the time, then this kind of planning would probably not have happened.
I know exactly what you mean, because as a strong pioneer myself, as I was listening to this, I had two completely different reactions. One, I was sort of just almost nauseated by the level of detail. I have to admit, it was difficult for me to just, even the pace of her speaking is so measured and so calm. So on the one hand, I was really adverse to that whole way of thinking. At the same time, I'm thinking, thank goodness somebody's doing this.
Yeah, and I think this loops back to what you said a minute ago about the sort of culture of valuing the extrovert more. So we have that true in the culture in general, and it sounds like maybe it's true in this particular office. But then we have work that requires different strengths. And so what happens is the introvert, or the Guardian in this case, seems like they end up being the one to do all the flexing, right? So I have to do the work that takes advantage of my strengths, but I also have to flex for the environment that I'm in. And I'm just wondering, is there a way that the environment could be doing a little bit more to recognize that and to support people who are doing work that they clearly need to get done? I don't think people always recognize how tough it can be on a Guardian who's trying to do all this work in an environment that doesn't really support it.
And she was just floored. Her initial reaction was that she had no questions, which I think was a very high compliment. That was definitely very rewarding. And then the day of the visit, we also received a lot of praise from the other programs that were meeting with our guests at just how smoothly everything ran. meetings and things like that. So it was all very well received, and definitely very rewarding to have acknowledgement that the detailed piece of what we created and what we executed was really the key component of the success.
So she succeeded. Rachel managed to pull this off. Her stakeholders are very happy. I thought it was interesting that the way she knows she was successful is that no questions were asked. That's her measure of success.
Right. Well, and I thought it was very smart of her to review that very detailed plan with her stakeholders in advance. Because if it just went off without a hitch and nobody saw all of the detailed planning that went into it, it would be one of those very quiet successes that guardians often contribute to. You know, the trains are running on time, so nobody notices anything. When the train is late, then suddenly everybody's looking at the guardian. What did you screw up? So the fact that she kind of showed her stakeholder in advance, this is why it's going to go well, because we have done all of these things to ensure that it does. Then when it went well, the person knew why. And I just thought that's a really smart way for somebody who does a lot of detail work that could go unseen to make sure that it's seen.
You're right. They tend to be humble. I think it's a great way to show off essentially what you've done without bragging. This is my work and it speaks for itself and I want you to understand it. But, that's the way that you proclaim that you've done a really, really great job.
We are closeted and no one really understands what it is to be introverted. It's often misinterpreted. And for those of us who are introverted, we often feel like we need to, make that side of us a little bit more dormant and kind of transform into the more external, what we think about when we think of consultant personalities. I think it's with that awareness, understanding the strengths that introverts bring. So we may be quieter, but we try to think about what we're saying and we make sure that it holds some value. So we don't talk just to be heard. Extroverts do a good job of speaking out about their efforts or throwing out ideas, whether they're the best idea or the most successful idea. But introverts, I think, oftentimes think more about the collective, so are not as outspoken about their contributions, even though those contributions are often as important as any others.
Suzanne, I'd love to hear your perspective on this because you're an introvert. Do you feel persecuted?
Yes, of course I do. Actually, given the nature of my role on a team that focuses in on business chemistry, I think it's a little different for me because I have learned to own it. And I almost feel, though, like I'm a representative of a persecuted group, I do feel somewhat like it's my responsibility to speak out, even if I don't feel like it, for the other folks who aren't speaking out. Persecuted might be a little strong, but I do feel like misunderstood, I think. And so I agreed with her. And the fact that she actually said we're closeted, I thought was an interesting way to think about it because it does feel in many environments like it's not actually okay to be an introvert. You have to at least be able to fake it, that you're more extroverted and that you can fit into that world. If you want to be successful, if you want to be seen as someone who can rise into leadership, if you want to move forward.
I will say, though, as again, an extrovert myself, I think that introverts often place too high a bar on when they can speak or not. So we heard Rachel say they don't speak just to be heard, that they only speak when they have something of value. Well, maybe that definition of what's valuable needs to be shifted a little bit because oftentimes if you are forced to work in a more extroverted work setting, there's a lot of feeding on one another's ideas. And so
Right.
A half-formed thought of an introvert might actually spark great discussion and debate. So don't hold it back until it's perfect. Share it.
Right. Well, and I think that, one recommendation I could maybe make to other introverts is if it makes you more comfortable, say, this idea is not fully formed, but, how about X, Y, and Z? So that, because I feel like I don't want to say anything until I'm sure it's smart. But other people are saying all kinds of stuff that's not particularly smart in the moment. But like you said, they get built on, and somebody being willing to take that risk to say something can make someone else come up with something really smart.
That's why it's so important for leaders to pay attention to this. They need to be actively involved in helping create an environment that's healthy for all of their people and not just the extroverted ones. And we saw that with Rachel's boss. But whether you're an introverted leader or an extroverted one, it's your responsibility to get that full potential, to have the energy be spent on the things that really matter. The confession is in. Secret Weapons is an example of how the science of business chemistry can improve the art of relationships. Be sure to tune in for our next episode. Find it on Deloitte.com or at iTunes and Stitcher. Business chemistry can help you understand your own work style and how it's similar to or different from others. This understanding lets you flex your style to better accommodate people's unique needs and leverage their strengths. Business chemistry helps improve working relationships and build stronger teams. You can learn more at our website, Deloitte.com.